Okay, so here is the second part to the Chatting with Stringers video. In this video, we talk more specifically about string types, tensions, frame types, and player styles. We didn't get around to talking about stiffer or more flexible frames, but I'm sure you can understand that from the topics we talk about, what you'll need to know is that it's quite a personal, in fact, it's a very personal thing. So if you were looking for a particular recommendation for a string at this tension with this frame, you're not going to get it, because two people with exactly the same playing style and standard, with exactly the same frame, would like different types of strings at different tensions. That's really, what we're talking about. Anyway, it's still a very interesting discussion. And then at the end, everybody finishes with one funny story. So that's pretty cool. So as always, if you've got any questions, please post them in the comments, and either myself or the stringers themselves will get round to answering them. And let's get on with it. Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Chat with Stringers. We've got everybody back that we had before, but they're in different positions, so hopefully that doesn't confuse you. Welcome again, gentlemen. I hope you had a good week or two.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, not bad.
Lots of head nodding and things. All right, so in the previous episode, we introduced ourselves and then we talked about the misconceptions. So we're going to carry on. And we're going to start basically with the main questions that I've been asked over my coaching career and from the videos and social media posts that I made about the first video. And that is the combination of string type, string tension, racket frame, and player style. Now, that's a lot of possible combinations. So what I'd like to start with, I'd like to start by asking Geoff, when somebody comes to you, what questions do you ask that person?
Usually to get a kind of a starting point, I'd ask them how many times they play a week. And that usually gives me a bit of an indication of their playing standard. So if they're playing more than 3 times a week, then immediately I'm thinking, okay, this person's serious about their game. And they're probably a little bit more attuned to what feel they're getting from the strings, what kind of characteristics they like. So that's kind of my starting point.
That's your starting point. All right. What about you, David? Do you ask the same question?
Almost exactly the same. The very first question is how often do you play a week, and then more down to the style of play and what the person's looking to get out of the strings. Particularly with tennis, where it's very important to get a feel of, is this person a sort of power player, or do they just want to hit the ball back over the net, or are they looking for more control? And then that will help narrow down the string choice for them.
All right, okay. What about you, Huw? I mean, following on from that tennis, but...
Well, for very similar questions that have just been asked. If it's a parent bringing a racket in, I'll also ask the age of the child, just to sort of determine whether, a synthetic gut or polyester or whatever, needs to be put in. Because as I think I alluded to in the last chat, that you don't want a 9-year-old using a very stiff polyester. So it's just trying to get as much information as possible. But yeah, like the others have said, how often they play, what their sort of playing style is, and what they're looking to achieve, what they want from the strings, really.
All right. Okay. Following on from that, one of the questions that we had on the video was about your point about polyester strings strung too tight, really bad for maybe a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. Would you say that that's still true for squash or less true?
I would say it rings true through all the sports, really, because the main reason that I said that is basically, a young child still growing, their body's still developing, muscles still developing, and so on. If you introduce something that's a stiff point of contact with the ball, that's going to send shock into the joints at the end. No matter how good the racket, good the strings, good the stringing is, and that can, in the worst case scenarios, hurt. That can hurt long-term development. That's my concern, particularly in tennis. Because of my experience, when you see a 9-year-old and they're using a stiff polyester, you can fast forward 5 or 6 years, and you can just see them having tendonitis, shoulder problems. Yes, tennis elbow, and I would imagine, I'm not necessarily a squash expert, but I would imagine that the principles hold true there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said. I replied and said that that's what I would say, but I'd ask you as well. All right, so John.
I don't tend to string polyester strings in squash rackets, though. I think that's the big difference. I think I'd say 90% of the strings that I do for squash rackets are multi-filament strings, compared to the opposite in tennis, where you have lots of polyesters. Yeah.
All right, that's a fair point. All right, John. Any other questions that you ask?
Yeah, I think the main question which I just ask people is really what type of player they think they are, and also what kind of player their friends or their playing partners would say they are.
Okay.
Because
you get an honest answer.
The two are very different. We'd all like to say that we're, beast mode Mohammed Al-Shabaghi, or we're Rami Ashur with the racket and can use the racket as a wand and hit nicks from all over the place. But I think asking it that way gets a little bit of realism from them, really. The point about how many times to play a week, that's a really good one. I think more than anything, it can signify how serious they are about improving their squash or how good they are. Generally speaking, decent players will play lots of times, but you also get lots of up-and-comers that are playing loads and loads and loads. And to Hugh's point and everybody else's, if you have the wrong type of string and they're playing 3, 4, 5 times a week or more, then it can have a detrimental effect. So I see some amateurs who, when I say amateurs, I mean people that are just coming into the game, that will buy power nick to put in their racket, so Ashaway power nick, which is a really Marmite string. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's quite a numb feeling string. There's not a huge amount of give in it. And in my mind, you have to be a really technically decent player to really get the most out of that type of string. So asking them what they've got at the moment in their racket versus how much they play and what standard they are, you can normally make a pretty good call.
Yeah, okay. All right. So back to Geoff. You know how often they're playing. You've got some idea of their particular playing standard. The next point would be to find out what racket they've got. Have you got, and this is a question for all of you eventually, have you got like combinations that you often recommend? So if somebody comes, I've got here, I want to use this racket a little bit later as a demonstration, but I've got, this is a Powerkill 110 SL. So if I come in with this, and I said that my game is based more on control and touch than it is on power, you've got a couple of types of strings, a couple of types of tensions that you would recommend?
So it's a really difficult question, but what you're trying to do is control the feel of the ball off the string bed. So if you've got your racket that you've got at the moment, so you've come in and you've told me how many times you play a week, I get an idea of what kind of standard you are. And you're showing me the racket that you've got, I can see what type of string setup you've got in there. And so I can gauge kind of what type of feel you would be getting from those balls. And then it's a question, the conversation is along the lines of, how do you feel the racket's playing for you at the moment? If you're feeling like the ball's skidding off the strings, then yeah, we can put in some other strings that give the ball a bit more grip, change how the ball reacts off the string beds. So it's kind of a two-way conversation. There is no set one string works for one particular racket, because it depends on the feel that you're trying to create, what it is that you're looking for.
Right,
so
okay.
If you tell me that it's feeling really dead, then I can make string choices based on that. If you're finding it's too lively, then same thing.
Okay, and your choices are based on your experience as a stringer, stringing lots of rackets, rather than your experience as a player based on playing with different rackets with different strings. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I do have as a player, I do have a particular setup that I like. But yeah, it's based on the feedback that I've had with thousands of people coming through the shop. What works for most people. You have the same type of conversations a lot, so you know what works for some people, and then you've got a big frame of reference. Yeah.
All right. Okay, David, do you want to follow on from that? Do you want to? I come in with my racket and I say I want this. How do you respond to that?
Yes, pretty much exactly as was answered there. From my badminton experience, because it's badminton coaching that I came through, I would certainly be looking at the racket. For a younger player, it's the equivalent of the classic brick on a stick. You're wanting a racket that's head heavy, so they don't need to use too much of their own power. The racket's doing the work for them. And then depending on their age, you progress through to having a lighter head because you've got the own strength in your arm. And then you sort of really work the string intention around that. But it's just generally down to having that discussion, that full discussion with a player, and getting as much information as you can, and then using your own knowledge to give them the best string choices and the best tension for what they're looking to get.
All right. Again, based on the years you've been stringing, rather than you testing all the different tensions and string types in different frames.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, because for myself, with tennis and squash particularly, when I first started stringing, I quizzed every player usually a few weeks after I strung their racket to get as much feedback as possible, because that's the information I'm looking to pass on to other players when they have questions for me.
Okay, that's a really good point. Huw, you want to follow on?
Yeah, very, very, again, good points raised there. I mean, it does come down to personal preference as well. So particularly in tennis, if you're, use a Wilson RF97 racket as an example, the Federer frame, I've got several, because it's a very popular racket, I've got several customers who use it, and the different requests for different setups, none of them are identical. So I've got some who prefer the racket, with Luxlon Alu power in it, or a full bedded poly. I've got some who want, copy the Federer mantra and have a hybrid with natural gut. And then I've got other people who just like the racket and put Wilson Sensation in it in a multi-filament. But for me, I would say that it's quite a powerful racket. You get a lot from the frame. Sensation's probably not going to be on its own the best string to sort of temper that power. But it's in the eye of the beholder. So that person, he may not swing massive, topspin, and he might just, push the ball, just likes the feel of the frame, likes it, the sensation. So it's all about trying to work with the customer and finding out exactly what they want. If they ask your advice, you can recommend, if someone came to me and they'd had it strung in sensation and they said, I can't keep the ball in, what would you recommend? Then I'd give some idea, some options, different things to try. But that's what I mean. It's very much, a racket can play very differently for the same racket can play very differently depending how it's strung and depending on the player using it as well. So it's just about having conversations and working out what's best with the customer.
All right, John, you're on. Wait, you're on mute. I don't think I.
Yeah, sorry.
All
That's fine. Sorry. Hi. Yes, I think in terms of different string types and different rackets, different setups, different tensions, I think it is a really, really personal choice for every single player, and it's good for them to have a choice. I think I've personally got my own favourite setup, a bit like Geoff and probably everybody else. But I think each different string has a different quality to it with the racket. So, for example, the Caracal racket which you showed us earlier, that's a pretty light racket, and that would, in theory, be built for speed of racket head and probably a bit of control rather than outright power. You want something that's going to be probably over 120 for outright power. So in that racket, I'd probably loosen the strings a little bit. So take not the tension down, put a nice multi-filament in there if the person was looking for a bit more power. If they were looking for out-and-out control, rack the tension up a little bit. Maybe stick some ash away in there, or another kind of line and twine, rough feeling squash string, so you can get a bit more cut on it. But I think you have to overcompensate for the lack of power through the head speed of that racket, because it's not particularly heavy, by probably dropping a bit of the tension on there. But it depends what type of player they are. From the first questions that you ask, what type of player are you? What do your friends say about you? That would, to me, indicate what kind of setup we should be putting in that racket.
All right. It sounds very much like we're crowdsourcing our experience in many ways. We're asking people for their feedback. There is, what we're saying, just to be, to clarify, there is no perfect setup for one racket for one string because it depends on what the player's like. And even if you get two players who have a very similar style, one might prefer a different string at a different tension. And what is frustrating for me a little is when I go on Reddit, I don't know if you follow the Reddit, the squash subreddit, you get these people saying, yeah, I've been playing 2 weeks, and can you recommend whether I should have this racket at £23 or this racket with this string at £22? And what I've got, I'm pulling it out because after a couple of weeks of playing, you're never going to notice the difference. Or
it's the half pound marginal differences on the cross strings and on the main strings. And I honestly think you're absolutely right, Phil. I think you need to have, unless they feel like an absolute dog, you need to keep those strings in there for a while just to see how they play, because some strings take a little while to play in as well. But just ripping something out straight away because you're not playing as well as you were with your last set of strings, that's crazy to me, because Ashaway, as I said, Ashaway Power Nick is totally different from, let's say, Ashaway Micro or a Technofiber X1 biphase. Completely different string, but you might find that after a month or two, you start hitting your lengths a lot better, you start dropping better. So you're absolutely right. You need to give things time, but there are some strings that I've tried that I've thought, wow, I'm not going to put this anywhere near any of my customers' rackets because they won't want to come to me again. There are some like that. It's really interesting, actually. So when we talk about tensions and string types, and I've spoken to Caracal about this, they've got the hot zone string, which can be a really good string. If strung right, it can be a really, really good string. But it kind of bucks the trend a little bit. So normally you loosen up a string tension to get a bit more power. What I find with the hot zone, if you string it too loose, it actually feels like hitting the ball with a pillow because it's such an elastic string. If anyone else is strung with hot zone, it's mega elastic. But that's kind of cool in a way, because if you string it just a bit tighter, 2 or 3 pounds tighter than you would normally, what you get is something which on touch shots is really, really tight on the racket. But when you hit it hard, then you get loads of elasticity. So you actually get some decent benefit. So you can actually have it a bit tighter. But there's a lot of stringers out there that will think, well, just whack it in at 20 pounds and they'll get tons of power. They won't. It'll go completely dead. Whereas if they put it at 26 or 28, they'd actually... So there are strings that kind of buck the trend a little bit. So I think having the knowledge of playing with it, and I only know that because I can feel the elasticity when I'm stringing with it, but also because I've played with it a few times with that. So I think having the knowledge of a stringer that's able to work out how elastic something is and how it's probably going to play, and then testing it, I think it's really, really important.
There's a very similar string as well, Luxilon Smarts string, which obviously a tennis string, and Luxilon recommends that strung between 40 to 48 pounds to get the most out of it. But trying sometimes to convince a customer, and it's a very nice string, it plays very nicely. It's polyester, but it's very soft on the arm. And it's been, I won't go into the details of how it's been made, but it's a very clever process, and it responds to how you're hitting the ball. But trying to convince a customer who's had his racket strung at 55 pounds or whatever for the last 10 years to try this new string and have it strung at 42, that's tricky. I mean, it's possible, and everyone I've put the string in has always liked it, but it's just, again, having the knowledge again to sort of justify recommending the string, really.
Yeah, we're back to that point about there is no perfect tension for a player or a frame. It's based on the string as well, a little bit.
Yeah.
Right, at this point, I want to start arguing with you. Okay, and I've been having this argument for all of my
one against four here, Philip.
Here we go, like getting the thing on. I fully understand that when you have a lower tension, you get more power. It's a very simple test. You put the racket on the floor, you stand on it, you drop a ball from a height. You can see it bounces higher when the tension's lower. I've got no problem arguing with people about that. But in all my career, and when I say career, I mean coaching career, I was never a really professional. I've always had more power, more control from lower tensions. And I've been prepared to listen to everybody and test different tensions. But I'm sure you can see from this one, I've got another racket that's better. I always hold the racket the same way. So in this case, it says ash away. So I always hold it, slice on the backhand, slice on the forehand, strings move in the same direction. I'm happy to leave them there. But that's the first thing. I want you to try and convince me I'm wrong, at least just for a discussion. Do you think it's black and white, that more tension is more control, or vice versa? Geoff, why don't you start with that?
I think define control. So to me, what you're describing is you have a particular, depending on the tension, depends on how long the ball stays on the string. So there's dwell time.
Yep.
And what you're defining as control is that you're feeling more control because the ball's staying on the strings the longer.
Absolutely.
So for you, control is low tension. But for another player, if their swing isn't as consistent, they'll have some variation on where the racket face hits the ball. Dwell time would be a bad thing. So they want the ball on and off the strings a little bit quicker to get more control.
Okay.
So
I can see that. All right. Okay. John, you want to agree with me? Disagree with me?
Yeah. So it really, honestly, it's such a personal thing, tension and what you get from it. I'll probably use the best example from squash that I think I can muster anyway, which is Gregory Gaultier.
Yeah. Okay.
So Gaultier is famous in the stringing world for having his racket strung at around 16 and a half pounds. Not kg, 16 and a half pounds. He's gone down as low as 12, 13 pounds before as well, which is pretty much half, if not less than half, the tension that most squash players, either in club or on the pro circuit, will have. And interestingly, a lot of players now are actually going down the scale, so they go looser rather than tighter, which they were doing 5 or 10 years ago. So Gaultier, the difference with Gaultier is that he gets very good control on the ball, but his backswing is very, very short. So if you watch Greg Gaultier play his squash, he's very, very quick motions, very, very snappy on the ball. Everything's about moving to the ball quickly and having that racket ready, kind of half cock really. So he generates really good whip on the ball, really good power. But if he was taking a full swing and really, really going for it, you may find that you lose that ball in the string bed and too much power and it goes all over the place. So I think each player has a different way of playing, different style, different way of cutting the ball, hitting the ball squarer, completely differs. So, I mean, tennis, again, will be Huw will know this far better than I or probably any of us will do, but tennis is a really good example of exaggerated swings. And some players really, really ham up those swings and need a bit of an extra swing. Other players will be totally, totally different. So I think control is in the mind, and it's also in the technique.
Okay, all right, Huw, you want to carry on there?
Yes, I think it's important to note though in these examples that this is based on fresh strings, so strings that are performing at their best. I mean that's where the comparison needs to be. So a racket that's not been in the racket long, comparing a loosely strung racket versus a tightly strung racket, because that's where you've got the maximum elasticity of the string, and it's the fairest comparison. So again, completely understand. I prefer much lower tensions in my racket, again, because I use an 18 by 20 racket, and I prefer the sort of lower trajectory, the control. I need all the help I can get from the frame as well. So, if I was to string my racket at 58 pounds, it probably wouldn't go beyond the service line. So again, but if I was to switch to a Federer and RF for 16-19, I'd increase the tension just because the racket itself is doing more. You need to bring in the control a little bit, and also to get, as John said, that personal feel the same. Because I string mine at the moment, my Ultra Tours at 46 with a Gut Alley Power hybrid. But if I put that in an RF 97, it would feel way too loose. I wouldn't. It would just go beyond that. The law of diminishing returns for me. Whereas, so again, but I wouldn't want to string. If I strung my Ultra Tour at 55, it would feel awful.
Yeah.
So again, that's based on, what with the comment you made about your strings. You don't move them back and things. That implies to me that the strings are past their best. because they're not snapping back to their original position. So that to me is still a point where you should restring that racket, because that string now is not doing what it's designed to do. It may, it's again, eye of the beholder. It may feel great to you, but I would argue there that you're getting an unnecessary trade-off in playability, because the string is not moving back. It's lost, again, as I said earlier, its elasticity. So it's not performing. So you would be far better off having your frame restrung at that point. Perhaps if you like where it is, perhaps at a lower tension to try and replicate that feel, but at least then the string is also doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, Ashaway sent me this, and it had already been used, and then I used it, and I don't really know how old, but it is pretty old. And David, another reason that I like to have lower tensions is because I feel it puts less pressure on the frame, a lot less pressure, and it is incredibly unusual for me to ever break a racket. Partly because when I touch the wall, I never stop it. It carries on, and I think that's an important point. You guys can agree or disagree with that. But I've always felt that having less tension has allowed the frame to last longer. Any thoughts on that?
That's a real personal one, I have to say. I tend to find most frames don't last because they are bashed off the walls rather heavily, and it's more down to the player and how hard they hit the ball. Certainly with string tension, as with the discussion we've had there, I have to echo what Geoff said. It's all about the time that the ball is on the strings themselves. I do have one player who's very similar to you. He's unhappy if he plays a game of squash and comes off the court and his strings are all perfectly straight. Because he knows it's not like him. He prefers the string movement, as it were, because he feels that gives him enough control, because he plays with an Ashaway string, which is textured, but it gives him the power because he has that movement in the string bed.
Okay. Anybody want to add something?
You see, it really is down to player preference, and it's down to the fact that if you have players who hold a good discussion with you both before and after they've had the strings in the racket, and after a period of time of using them, then you work together to get everything just right for that player.
All right. Okay. Anybody else?
There is a point though at just to answer your question about damaging the frame or better for the frame. It wouldn't be an issue if it was low tension, because you're obviously putting much less stress on the racket. But if you venture above the manufacturer's recommended tension, you are putting the frame at risk at that point. Just to use an example, Sampras obviously got hundreds of frames, from Wilson free. He used to have his tension with natural gut in the high 70s, if memory serves. And quite often, he'd snap several rackets during a match, and quite often when the string snapped, it was known that the frame would go as well at the same time.
Okay.
Not every time, but that's because he was having the racket at such a high tension. And bear in mind, he was using a Pro Staff 85, so it's a tiny little head.
Yeah.
Putting a very high, high 70s tension in that, it's putting so much pressure on the racket.
Yeah.
So I think it's a problem if you go to the top end of the scale, but not if you're stringing in at 30 pounds.
Yeah. I mean, when I first started playing tennis, when I was sort of 17, I was a Bjorn Borg fan, and I remember him having very high tension on his rackets, and I watched him like everybody else, and he broke rackets rather than strings. That was always the way I remember it, and I can't remember what tension he had, but I have a feeling it was 90, but it can't be 90. You can't have I don't know, maybe it was 90.
It would have been in a wooden frame as well, rather than graphite, wouldn't it? So
yeah, exactly.
I personally, I don't think what you're describing about breaking rackets in squash is an impact force. And I don't think that the string tension that you've got, even if you were high, I don't think it makes any difference to the longevity of the frame. It's the fact, it's how severe the impact is.
All right, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I probably echo that. I think in tennis terms, I've seen a few examples of rackets that have been strung so tight that it's actually kind of garroted the frame, and grommets start to meet. There's like a kind of meeting of grommets, and then it's actually pulled through like cheese wire onto the frame. sometimes, which is quite kind of crazy. What I do find sometimes in squash rackets, not all the time, is that you can actually see some kind of tension cracking near the throat of the racket.
Okay.
I'm not sure if anyone else has seen that. Sometimes just inside the throat, certainly on closed throat. So I think it can, but it's not a major thing. You don't really tend to see that until a racket's, quite old anyway.
Okay.
Really.
Yeah, sounds like I'm mixing correlation with causation. One of the things that I always teach my students is that they should never hit the wall with their racket. If it hits, it should keep going. Because I always feel, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I always feel that when it hits, there's nowhere for the vibration to go. It has to stay in the frame. Whereas if you hit and keep moving, it can be absorbed by the arm. Is that me just talking out the top of my head? Or
you're absolutely correct. And this is one of my bugbears, is why a bumper guard is called a bumper guard, because I don't think you should have a bump pad. I think you should glide. And I, with all the kids who I coach, and some of the adults as well, I try to teach them to glide the ball off the wall and to minimise the swing, not to hit it hard, but to open the face up, to hit the ball higher on the wall, so you can still get some decent length, but to kind of clip it off the wall instead, because kids especially, they're a really good indicator as to how strong a racket is, because kids will absolutely murder it.
All right, that's fair enough. All right.
So we call it the glider now instead of the bumper.
Yeah, we changed the name. But of course, I mean, many rackets nowadays are bumperless. I mean, I don't understand how that is possible.
There you go.
so I'm sponsored by iRackets.
And those are bumperless, aren't they?
Yeah, they're bumperless, and I've got rackets which I've had for them for 2.5-3 years that are still going, that are absolutely fine. I claim that iRackets claim that 96% of cases it's not a problem not having a bumper. I probably echo that. You get a few rackets that will go, sadly, but I think for a decent player that doesn't bang the racket against the wall, the bumper doesn't really make a difference. Where it does make a difference is protecting the strings. So you need the strings to be set low into the frame, which obviously I do because they come down. But there are other manufacturers out there who are exploring the similar technology or similar way of doing it, because a lot of the pros on tour, I string for a few of them, will just cut the edges of the bumper strip off. Okay. Because you can glide it off the wall a lot easier without having a bumper.
Yeah, I suppose that's not a big problem for tennis so much, is it? I mean, you obviously got bumper guards on tennis rackets, but you're not hitting the floor as much as you're hitting a wall in squash, I suppose.
Well, when I play, potentially, yes. But no, I mean, I'm struggling to think of any tennis racket now that doesn't have a bumper guard. But it's probably for a slightly different reason in tennis, in that it's so that it raises the bumper around the strings and protects the strings at the top of the head, which is the bit that's likely to come in contact with the floor when you hit a low slice backhand or whatever. Particularly on surfaces like clay, where you can also then get grits and clay trapped in there, which isn't a good idea for strings. So yeah, that it's there, but probably for a different purpose.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, David, tell me a little bit about stringing. I'm maybe using the wrong phrase here, but stringing patterns in the sense of the number of strings for the mains and for the crosses. What would you want to tell a person who's interested in learning about stringing patterns?
Well, the first one is follow the manufacturer's instructions. When I first started stringing, it was mostly badminton, as I've mentioned, and Yonex actually on their website have a page tucked away somewhere which actually shows all their different rackets and the various different stringing patterns that you should follow for doing the racket itself. So that's certainly the first point to go to. And there's various different ones. There's the sort of regular stringing patterns, I would call it, and the round the world one, which is more prevalent really with squash and I believe also with tennis. But for me, it's follow the rules. I'm kind of strict about that.
All right, that's fair enough. All right, Geoff, I mean, if somebody comes to you and says, should I get a very dense stringing pattern or should I get an open stringing pattern? What would be your response?
So for me, it's always try and understand the mechanics of how it's working. So what you're trying to do is control the string plane stiffness. So how stiff the strings all react or work together as a system. So if you've got a more open stringing pattern, so less main strings, less cross strings, then your string bed is softer.
Okay.
So it depends. If for instance, if you had a racket that had lots of strings in it, lots of main strings, lots of cross strings in it, the string pattern was very tight, then the ball will react. The ball crush on the string bed will react differently than if you've got a racket that's got really long strings, really open stringing pattern. So depends on what characteristics you're looking for as a player. If you want a ball to crush on the strings, you want a long dwell time, then you go for a tight stringing pattern.
Okay.
If you want more perceived power, you want the ball to crush less on the strings, then you go for a more open stringing pattern. So again, it's a personal thing, but you've got to understand the mechanics of what's actually happening and what effect you're trying to achieve.
All right.
If I can just interject there as well. One of the main differences between a 16-19 and an 18-20, which are the two most common in tennis, a 16-19 is actually a little bit easier to hit the ball. For a beginner, it's probably easier to hit because it'll give a higher trajectory over the net because it's a more open stringing pattern. It'll give easier access to spin, to top spin, again, because of the more open pattern, strings moving more. And then an 18-20 gives a much lower, flatter hit across the ball. So it might be better for someone who's played quite traditionally for 25 years or whatever, or it might be for a more advanced player. But for a more advanced player, it will then come down to personal preference because Roger Federer uses a 16-19, as does Rafa, and you wouldn't say, they should move to an 18-20 just because they're the most advanced players.
Yeah.
So, but that's at the sort of beginner introducing someone to the racket. That's probably for me the main difference. 16-19 is a bit easier to use, gives you easier access to spin. 18-20 is a flatter ball and less access to spin, but more control.
All right, okay. John, I mean, if somebody comes to you and asks about stringing, density or whatever the right phrase is, what would you be telling them?
Yeah, so general rule of thumb is the more dense the stringing pattern, i.e. the closer the strings are to each other, the more control, the wider apart they are, the more power they get, basically. So if you have a squash racket which has got 12 main strings in, the norm is 14 main strings. So if you've got a squash racket that's got 12 main strings in it, the chances are you might get a little bit more power from it. That's the theory anyway. And certainly a kind of larger head racket with 12 mains in will give you a bit more power. Now, there are, from a stringer's perspective though, I'm always quite wary with really open stringing patterns like the kind of 12 mains, because you've got to be really careful what type of string you put in them, because the strings will naturally move an awful lot more when there's more space in between them, which means that they grate against each other, they fray a lot quicker, and they break. So the type of frame they've got, the type of stringing pattern makes a difference. Quite a good compromise is the fan pattern. So that's where you've got all the shared grommets down. Yeah. Because what you've got is a very, very close pattern for the bottom half, and then it opens up and gives a little bit more power at the top. So it keeps the strings in really good position, but also allows a little bit of extra power on it. And there are a few rackets out there that have this. Dunlop have got a few. iRackets have got a really good one that Paul Cole uses. And I think Mantis have got a couple as well. So there are a few examples, and obviously Prince powering is probably the best example of this.
Yeah.
So I think the type of pattern does make a big difference. And if you've got a serial string breaker that's using a pattern that's too open, that's got 12 mains on it, you just got to advise them that it might be worth trying a racket that has got a closer string bed.
All right, okay, that's fair enough. Geoff, I had a comment. Somebody was saying he was using Technifiber 305, I think he said he was using, and it breaks every month. He plays 3-4 times a week, and it breaks every month. And it was like, why does it break? I mean, if somebody came to you with that particular question, what would be your response there? Sounds like an exam. Sorry, I really don't mean to make it sound like an exam. I'm just curious.
He's obviously looking for more durability out of it. My question, well, if you came into the shop, then I'd be able to see, but it's where does the string break?
Yeah.
So if the string's breaking in the middle of the frame, then it's because of string movement that has been touched on before. It's that kind of soaring action.
Yeah. Okay.
So for one more durability, then you try and string it to stop that soaring action.
Okay.
Either with a different string type or by adjusting the tension.
Yeah.
If it was breaking near the edge of the frame, then that's you need a string that's a little bit more elastic. So the string's got nowhere to go. I think the analogy, best analogy I've come across for that is if you imagine you tie a rope up to a dock and then it starts floating away. If you've got a stretchy string, when the rope comes to the end of its travel, then it'll slowly bring the boat to stop. Okay. If you've got a stiff string, then it comes to a halt abruptly and probably the string will snap.
Yeah.
So depending on the type of brake, if he wants more durability, which by the sounds of it he would be, then you adjust either the tension or the string type depending on what type of brake he's having.
Right.
I would also say if he's playing 3 or 4 times a week and only snapping it once a month, that's probably not too bad.
Yeah. You think?
Yeah, I think squash players, we're a funny breed, really, especially a few. Some see breaking strings as a mark of honour and a kind of badge that's to be worn. So some of the kids who I coach, when they break their first string, it's like, Dad, take me out for a pizza. I've just broken my first string. I'm like, give me the racket. That'll be X amount of pounds, please.
Yeah.
But no, I think Technifiber. So that I've got this thing with certain players that will shank the ball fairly frequently. Mm-hmm. Technifiber is not a shanker's string. I said shanker there, by the way.
Yes.
Technifiber is not the string that if you hit the ball frequently, you want to have on your racket. Yeah. Because it doesn't have the give that, say, Ashaway, Super Nick or XL or whatever will have in it. So I'll quite often try and find an alternative, which might be some form of Ashaway. It might be a Ashaway multi-nick, the new one, or it could be Rab. So Rab Sensor Fiber 1.27 is a really good alternative to people who love the Technifiber feel but want a bit more endurance. To caveat that, I'm a Technifiber guy. I love Technifiber strings. The X1 Biphase 1.18 is my all-time favourite string. So Technifiber is a string which is a high-performance string, but if you're not technically going to be hitting the ball in the middle of the strings all of the time, then
maybe it's
it may not be the right string for you.
All right. So is it fair for me to Sorry, David, were you going to say?
I was just going to say, yes, I had a very similar problem in that when I first started stringing for one of the main squash clubs, I had a customer who was coming back to me every 2 or 3 weeks for a restring, and he was constantly breaking Technifiber 305. And he was quite happy paying to have the restrings done all the time, whereas as a stringer, I was rather unhappy to have someone constantly coming back and destroying strings. And I actually phoned up my supplier at the time and had a chat with him and said, look, I think I'm stringing for Desperate Dan here. What can we do for it? And I then went into the club itself and spoke to the manager and said, look, here's the guy's name. Does he play a delicate touch game or is he what I'm thinking of? And he batters the ball all the time. And the first comment was, oh, you mean slasher? Looked him up on YouTube and watched him play and realised that this guy is not interested in playing a delicate spin shot. And my string supplier recommended a string. It's a titanium named string, but we popped that in his racket and it lasted 4 or 5 months, which was fantastic. And now when he hands his racket in for restring, he doesn't put the name of the string on the ticket, but he actually just writes slasher strings. And it's a classic case of, again, it is something that comes up again and again during the discussions, but if you speak to your customer and find out about them, or in this case, check out what their nickname is, it can help you bring out for them.
Yes, perfect. So would it be fair for me to summarise this conversation about tension and strings, that for people watching, there is no perfect combination of string type, string tension, stringing pattern, combination with frame and playing style? Don't think that you can just say, what is the best for this? There isn't. It's really what works for you after having spoken with your stringer. Would everybody agree with that? I just want to make sure that there's no doubt for the viewers here. They can't ask for one specific answer because there is none.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there is no one string or setup that's right for everybody. I think the job of a good stringer would be to advise based on the questions they've been asking, such as what type of player you are, etc., what type of racket you use.
Yeah.
The job of us is to find out as much about the person and the setup they've currently got as possible to ensure that we give them what we think is going to be the right kind of feel, and then you tweak it from there. I mean, Geoff, I've read on your tweets sometimes that you've got a few players that come in wanting slightly different things all the time, and you advise them. Geoff's a good one. I know David is as well, and Huw most likely is in the tennis world, given his standing. I think we all, as a collective here, are pretty good at asking those questions. I see it frequently on the tweets and on the Facebook comments, which is good to see. Not just putting in your own preference. I know some stringers who will only use one string. That's one of the reasons why I started stringing more a few years back, was because I was just fed up with somebody trying to push their own type of string into what I wanted.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. All right, then. So we've got some time left. We've got to start with our funny stories. I mean, the whole thing started in my mind because I remember seeing Geoff, he tweeted about somebody coming in with an aluminium racket. And I was thinking, why would anybody restring an aluminium racket? Surely it'd be cheaper to buy a new racket. But anyway, so who wants to start with some funny stories? David, I remember you mentioning it. Oh, I didn't tell us.
Oh, okay, I have to. I only hope that the person concerned, I only hope his wife doesn't watch this video.
Okay.
I did 2 restrings for this chap who got in touch with me, and each time he said, this is the specific string that I want. And when we did the first restring, the racket, it was a tennis racket, and he still had the original manufacturer's strings in it. So we just simply strung it at the midpoint, so we had the starting position for what we do in future.
Okay.
And so the first 2 restrings, specific strings, different ones I asked for each time. And when the racket came back after about another 4 or 5 months, and he's a regular player, so this is okay. And he had a very specific string in mind. So I went through my sort of brochure that my supplier can get for me. And each time it was a sort of touch control string. So I didn't have any concerns about what he wanted the string for. This suited his game. But it was a more expensive string the third time round. So I did the racket for him. He was needing it for a match in about 3 days' time. And when he arrived to collect it, I could see him coming towards me. He had cash in hand, which is what all stringers like to see, and handed me the money. And just before I gave the racket to him, I said, it's really great to get to string this tennis racket for you because it's the first time I've strung a tennis racket in gut strings. And his face turned to a sort of combination of disgust, horrific, whatever. You know, he just looked absolutely shocked at the fact that this racket had been strung for him. And he just said, did you say gut? And I said, yes, it's Babolat VS Touch hybrid set, gut mains. I said, it's the strings you asked for. And he said, oh, I read the review, but I didn't realise it was gut strings. And I said, well, is this going to be a problem for you? And he said, well, I'm a vegetarian. We all are. We don't even use animal products. And at that point, I thought, I wished I'd told you that after I'd given you the racket. But he still take it because he had a match to play. And, you know, later on that week, I got a text ping up on my phone from him, and I thought, oh, this is it. He's going to say, please take it back off me, cut the strings out. I'll never do this again. But the text simply said, David, the strings are fantastic.
When you said
so there's a classic lesson. He'd been reading reviews of different strings for a touch control player, and had read the review of the Babolat VS Touch hybrid sets, but just hadn't read the bottom line, which said what the strings actually were.
Yeah. Okay.
So there we are. But I'll still never forget the look on his face. It was an absolute delight. But he has used the strings since, so they clearly are the right choice.
Did he tell you the strings were tasty after as well?
Yes. But I had actually strung a few badminton rackets with gut strings before, which my children had played with and quite enjoyed them. But this was, although I've since strung quite a few other ones with I think we mentioned the Federer Champions Choice. I've had a few customers ask for that. But this chap has come back to me and is using the same strings. So, yeah, I don't think he's mentioned it to his wife yet.
I mean, when I first started playing tennis, it was called catgut, and I don't think it ever came from cats. I think it was always sheep. I mean,
yes, it's sheep. Yes,
but
it's cow's intestine.
Sorry,
It's cow intestine.
Cow is intestine. Okay,
yeah, right.
It's collagen, the same stuff ladies put in their lips.
Okay, so injecting springs in their lips. Okay, fine.
Hey, it's a new sideline. Times are tough at the moment for us stringers. We got natural gut implants into yeah. Okay, that's
because we're worth it.
Right. All right. When you said, it's the first time I've done a tennis racket, I thought he was going to, that's why I put my hands up. I thought he was going to say, oh my God, I've been playing squash with him.
No.
I thought you were going to say.
But it was his face, the minute I mentioned gut, and his face just dropped, and he just looked utterly just horrified that he'd got gut strings in his racket, poor guy. But he liked them, so in the end it came out kind of okay.
I suppose a lot of people, younger people, maybe under 20, 25, wouldn't necessarily know that gut is a natural product from an animal. I mean, there's no particular reason, just the word gut. And unless you're a native English speaker, you might not associate gut with the stomach. I mean, as natives, you do that, but I teach English to non-natives, and they'd never heard of the word gut. So there wouldn't necessarily be a connection that younger people would make or non-natives would make. So, all right, John, you got a story for us?
Yeah. So I was racking my brains. I've got a few, but I think the one that made me chuckle the most it's probably about a year or so ago. I think it was probably last summertime. I had a message ping up on my Facebook page, on the String Doctor Facebook page. And it was a private message sent to me by, I want to say, so a travelling folk band from Cumbria who were visiting Devon to do some touring on the weekends. And they'd mistaken me as somebody that might be able to tune up their banjos and other fancy instruments. So I actually ended up having some really funny conversations with the guy that led this group. He clearly found the wrong person. I did offer to tune up his banjo for him if he wanted to, if he can get the strings. But no, that was probably one of the more amusing ones. The fact that I was almost commissioned to retune and restring a whole load of instruments for a travelling folk band from Cumbria.
Well, it's always a sideline. I mean, you got the name. You can use it for two things, I suppose. Right,
I did have a similar one where somebody came in, and it was after my offcuts of natural gut. And it was a bit weird. Why do you want the offcuts? But it's because he wanted to string his hurdy-gurdy with it, which is a folk instrument. Which, when you Google it and go and have a look at it, you'll see what it is. I think it's something a handle that you keep on turning, and then the string just vibrates. I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, I had a little sideline for a while for hurdy-gurdy players.
Hurdy-gurdy,
taking my offcuts.
Sell them on eBay. Hurdy-gurdy strings. Yeah. All right. Any funny tennis stories, Huw?
One that springs to mind, a few years ago, I was stringing at the Boodles exhibition event in Stoke Park. It's sort of a unofficial Wimbledon warm-up event. And this particular year, a certain leading Spanish well-known player was also playing in said event. And I was there stringing rackets. He'd arrived with his family. It's, I don't know if any of you know, Stoke Park's a very, very nice country club in Buckinghamshire. It's golf course, this, that, and the other. It's a very nice corporate style event that's run, and it attracts quite a few big names who are just using it as exhibition matches instead of practice hits, essentially. And so anyway. Leading Spanish tennis player came across and been there all day with his family, eating, enjoying the venue before he was due to play a scheduled match later in the afternoon. Anyway, got closer and closer to his match. I was there doing my thing, stringing other players' rackets there, and we all had walkie-talkies. Came out, small problem, just about to get ready, and he's forgotten his grass court shoes. Or more accurately, someone in his entourage had forgotten his grass court shoes.
Okay.
And so anyone, has anyone got a pair of grass court shoes, specifically Nike ones, that kind of gives the player away, that they could lend, and a few people, and a few of the hitters, they either had it or they didn't have the right size of make. And as it happened, I was due to have a hit with a friend after the matches had finished that day on the grass. So I had my grass court Federer Vapors in the boot, and I said, well, he's welcome to try those if they want. So I went and got them. And lo and behold, they fit him perfectly. So said leading tennis player, Rafa, wore my shoes for his exhibition match. And so it was a very surreal experience. He completely destroyed them in one set. I'd had them for about a year and a half and they were fine. But they were completely ruined. But I was obviously never going to wear them. And I had to say to the tournament organizer, I said, look, any chance I can get obviously they're very grateful because it allowed him to play and everything went ahead. And I said, any chance, I could get a photo, because I said, no one on earth is going to believe this story otherwise. Yeah. So not only that, I had a photo with him. He was very nice, and he also signed my shoes. But I've got one here, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's a coincidence, isn't it?
So, if I don't know how well this will work, but
look at that! Fantastic.
And the other one.
Excellent.
So there we go. But
how do they smell?
He didn't. Well, he didn't give me. I could never wear them again. He didn't give me the insoles back. He obviously has his own. But yeah. So there we go.
So that's how you roll in tennis. In squash, it's all about vegetarians and folk bands.
What can I say?
All right. Well, I'd like to
and hurdy-gurdies.
Hurdy-gurdies. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all again for your time. I'm hoping that this was more specific than the previous one, in the sense that we talked about tensions and things, which is what people always ask about. So hopefully that will be useful for them. I won't ask specifically, can we do this in the future? But I would like to, not necessarily in the next couple of weeks, but maybe, in a few months, in 6 months, maybe there'll be other things that we can talk about. I mean, I do feel that we haven't finished our agenda and there are other things to talk about, but I don't want to commit you to, saying yes now. So hopefully viewers will be able to do some other ones. Any final words from anybody before we say goodbye?
Thanks, Philip, for organising this. It's really good to get together with all of the other stringers who ordinarily may not all be available on the same day. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, especially speaking to David, to Huw, and to my friend Geoff as well. All very good fun.
All right, excellent. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Philip.
Agree more.
Sorry?
I'm saying I couldn't agree more.
Oh, couldn't agree more. All right, perfect. Your connection, David, is a little bit slow today.
Is it? All right, okay.
A little bit lag. Anyway, no problem. Well, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. And if, as a viewer, you've got any questions, please post them in the comments. Hopefully the guys will have a chance to look. And if not, I definitely will and get some answers. In regard to the previous video, I have posted Huw's video about the people in China, just like 10 seconds doing the stringing.
Just to clarify, it's not me filming it though.
Oh, okay.
I'm not there filming it.
All right, okay.
It's not you stringing them either.
No.
Fast. Yeah. And almost by hand as well in some cases. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and let's hope that we can all get back on court within the next few weeks. And then when we get back on court, there'll be work for you to do, and I'll be able to get back to making videos and all sorts of other things. So that's it. Thanks very much, and see ya.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Well, that was the second part of Chatting with Stringers. I hope that you found it interesting. I do hope to do ones with coaches, players, administrators, refs in the future, but I'm not going to make any promises about when that happens. On the screen at the moment is a subscription button. If and only if you think that my content is useful, please consider subscribing. There's also a playlist of other things that I think you might find interesting, and one video that YouTube thinks will be a good fit for you based on what you've been watching. And remember, do something every single day to improve your squash. See ya.